I had barely finished unpacking when it started. A pounding on my door, voices shouting about their lake. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but within minutes, the entire HOA board was on my porch, waving papers and demanding that I hand over what they claimed belonged to the neighborhood, my lake, the one that came with my property deed. By the end of that day, they had threatened me with fines, legal action, and even cutting off access to my own driveway. That's when I discovered something that changed everything. I controlled their docks. So what do you do when the HOA declares war on your home?
When I first found the property, it felt like a dream. A quiet neighborhood, tucked against a sparkling lake that reflected every sunset like a painting. The house was small but perfect. A wraparound porch, big windows, and just enough land to feel private. After years of saving, searching, and dealing with cramped apartments, this was my sanctuary.
The neighbors seemed friendly enough at first. A few polite waves when I drove in, a welcome basket from the retired couple across the street. The lake was calm most days, with the occasional fishing boat or kids skipping stones along the shore. It felt like the kind of place where you could exhale, finally slow down and feel at peace. I spent the first week making the house my own, hanging family photos, painting the shutters, clearing weeds near the water's edge. Every evening, I'd sit outside with a cup of tea and watch the sun melt into the horizon. I kept thinking, this is it. This is the life I worked so hard for.
But there were signs, little things I brushed off at first. A notice taped to my mailbox about community maintenance expectations. A stranger snapping pictures of my yard from across the street. A note left on my door reminding me about dock access hours, even though I didn't share my dock with anyone. I thought it was just a quirky neighborhood thing, maybe a little over-organized, but harmless. After all, everyone had told me this was one of the best-run communities in the county. It was only later that I would learn what best run really meant, and how far they were willing to go to keep control. Looking back, the moment that set everything in motion was so small I almost missed it. A single envelope slipped under my door one morning, with the HOA's letterhead stamped in bold across the top. It wasn't a welcome note. It was a warning.
The letter wasn't just a warning. It was a list. 3 pages of violations I had supposedly committed in the first 2 weeks of living there. My grass was uneven. My mailbox paint was non-compliant. And my favorite? Unauthorized modification of shoreline property. I hadn't done anything except pull weeds. At first, I laughed. Surely this was some mistake. But the HOA wasn't laughing. The next day, a courtesy notice turned into a formal fine. $150, due in 10 days. That's when the visits started.
Every other morning, someone from the board would show up to inspect my property. They'd walk around my yard with clipboards, peering through my windows like they owned the place. If I stepped outside to ask what they were doing, they'd just smile and say, "Routine compliance check." I tried to stay calm, to play along. I repainted the mailbox, I trimmed the grass shorter, I even left the weeds near the lake untouched. But the letters kept coming. Every fix seemed to trigger 2 more violations.
Then came the lake. One Friday evening, I came home to find 3 trucks parked near my dock. A group of HOA members, the same ones who'd been pounding on my door that first day, were unloading equipment. They had coolers, chairs, even fishing gear. One of them had a key to my gate. When I confronted them, they told me they were exercising community rights to shared water access. I reminded them, politely, that my deed clearly stated my property included the shoreline and the dock. They laughed. One of them said, "That might be what your paper says, but around here, we do things differently." That night, I couldn't sleep. My so-called dream house felt like a trap, my lake suddenly a battleground.
The next week, it got worse.
I woke up one morning to find an orange notice staked in my front yard. Non-compliance pending legal action. According to the notice, I owed over $1,000 in fines, accumulated from failure to comply with community standards. I started documenting everything. I took photos of every notice, every visit, every stranger trespassing near my dock. I made a folder with timestamps and dates. If they wanted a fight, I was going to be ready.
But they were ready too. A few days later, I came home to find my dock padlocked. My boat, which had been tied there, was pushed into the shallow water, half submerged. A sign was zip-tied to the gate. Dock access suspended until fines are paid in full. I called the HOA president immediately. She didn't answer. Instead, I got a voicemail. "When you're ready to be a cooperative member of this community, we'll talk." I was furious, but I wasn't alone. As I began asking questions around the neighborhood, I discovered a pattern. Other homeowners had been targeted too. One for leaving a flower pot on her porch, another for painting her shutters the wrong shade of blue. Some had even sold their homes just to escape the harassment. But here's what the board didn't realize. My property was different. The lake wasn't just a pretty view. It came with legal rights that were spelled out clearly in my deed. I didn't just own a piece of the shore. I controlled access to the docks they all used for boating, fishing, and community events. So I did what they never expected. I locked the gates. I posted my own notices, citing the deed restrictions, and warned the trespassers would be reported. I installed cameras along the shoreline, and when they tried to remove the locks, I called the sheriff. That was the day the neighborhood turned into a war zone. The HOA called an emergency meeting. They sent letters to every resident, claiming I was jeopardizing community resources and creating hostility. People started glaring at me when I drove by. One woman shouted at me from her porch, "You're ruining it for everyone!" And yet, for the first time since I moved in, I felt in control. The board responded with their boldest move yet. They filed a lawsuit. I was served papers accusing me of withholding shared property and interfering with HOA operations. It should have scared me, but when my attorney reviewed the case, he just smiled and said, "They're bluffing. You hold all the cards." That's when I realized the HOA wasn't unstoppable. They were just used to everyone backing down. And I wasn't backing down.
The weeks leading up to the court date were chaos. Anonymous letters stuffed in my mailbox. Dead fish left on my dock. My tires mysteriously slashed one morning. Each incident only made me more determined to see this through. By the time we walked into the courtroom, I had a binder full of evidence. Photos, notices, security footage, even audio recordings of board members threatening me. And what happened next would leave the entire community stunned. The courtroom was packed that morning. Nearly half the neighborhood had shown up, whispering in the wooden pews, glancing at me like I was the villain of some small-town soap opera. The HOA board sat together at the front, looking smug and perfectly coordinated, as though they'd already won. But I wasn't the same person who moved in a few months ago, timid and hopeful. I was ready for this. The judge called the case, and the HOA's attorney went first. He painted a picture of me as a selfish homeowner who disrupted the harmony of the community and blocked shared access to a vital neighborhood resource. I let him finish. Then it was my turn. My attorney stood, calm but commanding. "Your Honor," he began, "what the HOA has failed to disclose is that my client's property does not merely border the lake. It controls the lake." We presented the deed, the survey maps, the original easements from decades ago. Piece by piece, my attorney laid out the paper trail proving that not only was the dock mine, but every dock attached to my property line
fell under my control. The judge leaned back, scanning the documents for what felt like an eternity. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm but sharp. "It appears," he said, "that the HOA has overstepped its authority." The judge ordered the HOA to immediately remove all fines, restore full access to my dock, and issue a formal written apology within 10 days. The board members sat frozen, their confidence shattered. But the real twist came after the ruling. My attorney had filed a counterclaim for damages, not just for the fines, but for emotional distress and property interference. The judge didn't dismiss it. Instead, he set a hearing date to determine how much the HOA would owe me. The room erupted. Some neighbors gasped, others looked relieved. For the first time, I realized many of them hadn't dared to fight back, and watching me stand up to the board was giving them a kind of courage they'd been too scared to find.
Walking out of that courtroom felt surreal. My heart was pounding, but not from fear this time, from vindication. Everything they had done to push me out of my home, every notice, every threat, every sleepless night, it all led to this moment where I finally had the upper hand. The days after the court hearing felt strangely quiet. No envelopes taped to my door, no strangers circling my yard, no passive-aggressive notices in my mailbox. Then, exactly 9 days later, it arrived. The formal letter of apology from the HOA, typed on their official letterhead, signed by every board member. I pinned that letter to my refrigerator like a trophy. 2 weeks later, we returned to court for the damages hearing. The HOA argued, of course, but my evidence was solid, and my attorney was relentless. When the judge announced the decision, I almost couldn't believe it. The HOA was ordered to pay me several $1,000s in damages. The board's tone changed overnight. The president resigned within a month. 2 other board members followed. A new group of volunteers took over, ones who actually lived by the rules they enforced. For the first time since moving in, the neighborhood actually felt like a community. And my lake, it became a symbol.
On summer weekends, I'd invite neighbors over for barbecues, let kids fish off the dock, and even hosted a small end-of-season gathering where the new HOA board thanked me, publicly, for standing my ground and forcing change. I had come here looking for peace and privacy. What I found was a battle I never expected to fight. But in the end, that battle gave me exactly what I wanted, a home where I could finally breathe. So, what would you do if the people in charge of your neighborhood tried to take away what was rightfully yours? Would you back down, or would you lock the gate and make them think twice? It became a symbol,